Okay, so I think we're ready to get started. It's just now at the half hour and we've got some people in attendance. We're also recording the video presentation so that if people want to watch this in the future, they can. Today we're going to be talking about hiring. Most of you know I'm Wendy Reifer, working with ePractice Manager to take up this subject for managers, HR specialists, doctors, and really anyone who's faced with this important topic for a practice. So we cover this periodically in coaching and consulting sessions, but also wanted to put together just kind of a training webinar online session for everyone today. We've got lots of different types of practices that are in attendance. So at the end, we'll have some questions and answers, hopefully. And it's general information. So this is the kind of thing that you want to keep in mind for your coach or your consultant to take up in a more detailed way. But there's basic information that I think applies to everyone. So we'll start with that. Practices have to hire, right? Brand new practices have to hire the first of their staff. And practices have to replace team members, practices expand and need to add to their teams, and this is an ongoing subject. Well, one of the things that surprises me as we embark upon consulting and coaching with practices is that it's not always treated as an ongoing subject in the HR management part of a practice. We kind of do it on a coping basis, right? Which has to do with, oh dear, we need somebody, let's hurry up and scramble and see what we can get. And we're desperate, and the person who we're replacing is leaving, so we kind of take the candidate that we think we can instead of waiting for the candidate that we really need, and all of those things. And that's pretty common, pretty familiar to everybody. But one of the things that is a little more hidden is that when we don't devote our full attention to this, we're not at our best, even when we're doing the task, right? So if you have a manager who's handling taxes for the practice that day, and then all of a sudden is faced with a hiring situation and needs to, oh yeah, I have to respond and read those resumes that I got and do that real quickly in between things, we don't take a deep look at that. And we're not particularly great in the emails that we send or the phone messages that we leave because we're just saying, hi, I saw your resume, call me back, that kind of thing. And again, that sounds very accusatory. We all have good manners. We all know how to run our practices. We don't actually do things that way, but it does come across that way when we minimize the amount of time that we spend or we minimize the amount of attention that we have to devote to it. So let's talk about the cost of that. When a practice is faced with hiring, replacing, or adding a new person, it can cost, and this is in the practice's time, seeing that it's a problem, living with the problem, deciding to do something about the problem, fussing around with the problem. It can cost about $30,000 worth of team effort just to hire someone. And that's a big price tag. And by the way, that's for an entry-level position. When you start getting into a management position and when you start getting into hiring doctors for a practice, management escalates up to that $50,000 mark, and associates, it goes higher up into the $100,000 and beyond. So this is the kind of thing that is costing a practice dollars when we are doing it. Now, what if we do all of that and then the person doesn't work out? Wow, now you've got to repeat the process, and you can see that the cost doubles and triples over time. So when we're talking about this subject, let's think about how we want to approach it overall. Take a moment to step away from your desk and your phone and your moment-to-moment traffic and think about how you can organize this activity for the practice. Well, one of the first things that we should do is to spend time on this activity in the first place. Whether or not you are really looking for someone in the moment, or even if you're desperate for someone in the moment. Managers, HR managers, really have to take a look at a couple of basic things first. So you have to set aside the time. I'm not going to be on the phones from this time to this time. I'm not going to be assisting from this time to this time. I'm not going to be handling my email from this time to this time, and make it widely known. Make other arrangements for coverage in other positions so that you can step away from your routine functions and really dedicate that time to your hiring practices. So one of the first things to take a look at is, do you need to hire someone? I understand that that sounds like a silly question, but practices change, right? So maybe you're in a situation where you can steal a team member from another department that has become optimized and no longer needs to be staffed the way that it is. Maybe you are in a situation where there's been a decline in the practice and you truly don't need to replace that position. Or perhaps you're in a situation where you have a need for that position, but you can shuffle the deck a little bit. So that's kind of an interesting thing that we overlook sometimes. Do we really need to hire another person? And sometimes we can split a position and have somebody do that function part-time while they do their own function part-time. And it's worthwhile to run a test and a pilot for maybe a month and see if that is a functional situation, just by reallocating your resources and taking a look at things. So it's important to always be looking at your job descriptions, looking at your patient flow, and taking a look at what your proper staff allocation should be in the first place. So next, again, we've talked about setting aside some time to do this. This applies whether or not you're desperate for a team member. A lot of hiring practices have to do with networking in the first place, right? So you need your base of go-to places for where you're going to find resources to look for people. We suggest spending some time online first. It gives you a really good glimpse at things. Believe it or not, a lot of hiring is done through Craigslist still these days. A lot of employers don't use it as an output mechanism, but a lot of employees are looking for jobs on Craigslist. So it's something that you don't want to overlook. It's low cost. You can refresh that once a week and pretty much just keep it there as a constant while you're in the hiring phase. But other sites that you can look at are Indeed and Glassdoor, and these are good resources because they give you more than just the opportunity to post your ad, which of course you can do. But they also give you calculators for what the industry standard is and some regional information about the salaries for those positions. You can look at other people's ads and see what other people are posting for, what they're paying, what benefits they're offering, and kind of keep yourself in the know as to how the market is going. There are fluctuations in the employment market, and at times, dental practices are faced with a bit of a buyer's market when it comes to assistants, for example. And when that's the case, you really want to know that. You want to be in touch with what other people are offering. You can create a situation of high turnover in certain positions if you don't make your offerings and your communication stand out. People will act interested in the position but not follow through. People will come to the position and job hop because they have another offer, things like that. So we want to avoid all of that with just some good research. So once you've done your online research, you need a real world network of how it is that you're going to proceed, right? So one of the things that we suggest is that you have a staff meeting and talk to your staff about your hiring practices. Let them know that this is an expanding practice and something that you really want to put into the staff awareness. Now, sometimes you can offer a little bit of a bonus for a team member who gives you a candidate who may be able to work in the practice. And if that's the case, then after 90 days, you give them a bonus, something like that, and you can decide that with the management of the practice, what you want to offer. Sometimes when you're desperate, we put out a bounty and we raise that number higher, higher, higher over time and see if it's the kind of thing where you can attract some attention from your existing staff to make that happen. But your employees know you. They know who you are. They know how you do things. They know who their friend or colleague or somebody they've worked with before, and they kind of have an idea of whether or not it's a good fit. So they do some of the work for you in doing some of this connecting, networking, throwing you some leads, that kind of thing. So that's one thing that you can think about, is just making sure that your staff awareness is in place, having to do with your hiring practices, and tap into what they have to offer as far as ideas and advice. Another thing that we sometimes overlook is, what if you are expanding? I know there are several practices out there who have opened another office or who have added more doctors to their practices, things like that. we're shy about talking to our patients about that, and I understand why, because it sounds a little bit odd. But when it does have to do with practice expansion, and you're not just necessarily hiring, a scrub tech in the back to replace the person who's leaving, it is okay for you to talk to your patients about the idea that you are expanding, that you're growing, and that you're adding to your team. They like hearing and being part of a practice that is expanding, and sometimes they are not necessarily a candidate themselves, but they may have a friend, a family member, a friend of a friend who they will pass on a good word, and perhaps give you some insight into who they might have available. So this is something that it's okay, and if you need permission, I'm giving it to you. It is okay for you to talk to your patients about the idea that you're expanding and you're adding to your team. It gets overlooked, and sometimes we've had a number of circumstances where really great hires have come from people who came out of retirement and wanted to pick up some work for just a couple of days, or whose kid was just graduating from something or another and was looking to get into the field. Some really long-term and good hires have happened from that kind of thing. So keep that in mind. Another way to open the door here and just kind of give you more and more prospects is to consider applicants from other fields. So it's important to understand that you are buying a bit of a training runway in that case. And for somebody like, let's say, a surgical assistant, for example, that's a difficult conversion for you to make. You are certainly biting off an awful lot in terms of training. But for other positions in your practice, there are people in other fields who have spent a fair amount of time contributing to customer service practices, very, very detailed management work, lots of accounting practices, and there are things that they can lend to your practice and be quite helpful with some industry-specific training. And I think that we should keep that in mind. It is oftentimes important for you to be hiring based on the idea of personality, tone, responsibility level, education level, just how driven a person is in general. And when you find the right fit with those characteristics, you are often in a position where you can give them a little bit of training in your field, and they are off and running. Now, I do understand that it affects your training, and we can help you with adjusting your training for something like that. But finding the right person is a really good first start. And so don't necessarily neglect the applicants that you get out of hand just because they happen to come from another field. And don't necessarily neglect to promote the positions that you have available in areas that include people from other fields. So that is an interesting situation. Sometimes you actually end up with less time training these people because you've got an overall education and responsibility level. Oftentimes these also come to you from networking, meaning your personal relationships or your business relationships with other people, practices, businesses, things like that. And again, anytime you're talking about a referral, you are talking about like-minded people coming together and making connections of, oh, it would be good. I bet this person, I bet this thing. Those tend to have a little bit more of a lasting result. And so something that, deserves a little bit of attention. So what else can we do? When it comes to this situation, I find that if you have 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 different ways of where you go to look for applicants, it really tends to make it easier, does some of the heavy lifting for you. So what about educational institutions? We neglect them because we think that they only have to do with new graduates. Well, that's not always the case. Sometimes an educational institution offers lifetime job placement assistance for their graduates. And you're not always dealing with a person who is just coming out of school as a new graduate and is going to be having their first job for the first time. Now, that's not always a bad thing to hire a new graduate, but if you network with the assistant training schools, some of the other trade schools, things like that, you may be dealing with a lifetime assistance situation with job placement, and you might find candidates who are just looking to make a move, and they may have a job posting center, a networking center, things like that. When it comes to your social media, of course, positivity is an important part. You don't want to say, hey, we're desperate, please come see us, send us anybody you know, we'll pay more and more money. You know, all that kind of messaging is just ridiculous. But you do, of course, have the opportunity to talk about an expanding practice that's always looking for the right person. And if you say it that way, we're looking for just the right person. We're adding to our team. We just, you know, we're going to our people here because we want to find the right person for us and for our patients. That makes a big difference. Sometimes there are some local and regional publications that you guys are aware of. I know in my area there are some neighborhood newsletters and some town papers that people really drift to in terms of everything from, hey, what's the good concert that's going on, to some of the business opportunities, to discount programs, things like that. So it's a good idea for you to get a list for your practice. And if you have more than one location, do this regionally for each practices. What are some of the go-to regional publications and listings that you might take advantage of in terms of job postings? At the very worst, it's promotion for your practice, right? Because people see that you've got an expanding practice and that you're adding to your team and things like that, and it gets the name of your practice out there in front of others. But at best, you might get some people who are right there in your area and looking for a life change. What I mean by that is some of the practices that we work with have very interesting commute patterns, right? Very, 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 very interesting commute patterns. And people will change jobs over the location of a practice. So if you zero in on some of this regional stuff, it is a bump in two ways. You can get some more names and you can get some more leads, but you also get the right kind of person who is genned into this community, this neighborhood, the way that we do things, and they probably don't have to travel so far, so their schedule is a little more manageable, things like that. There are employment agencies out there. They can be used for temps. Sometimes, instead of going to an employment agency for just a hire, which is okay, sometimes it's quite expensive and it's not always the most qualified leads, and you need to be aware of that. One of your go-to actions can be for you to use a temp. Get a temp, even for yourself, so that you can dedicate some time to the hiring process and slow down and find the right candidate. Get a temp for the position. Of course, that person could turn into a hire for you, but perhaps they can help with answering phones, passing instruments, simple things that buys you a minute to actually get a candidate in the door and train that person. So sometimes it ends up that you're spending a few bucks to do that, but it can be worth it. And again, there are temp to hire situations, employment agencies, things like that. Watch out for the costs, understand the terms of what you're getting involved with. But we can also refer you to a little bit of a more customized headhunter type of situation if you're interested in that. But somebody who's just working for you and is not necessarily taking, 30% of the annual salary of someone that you're trying to place in a position, because like I said, that can get quite expensive. But let's think about the other practices that you do business with as well. Sometimes there are referring practices or practices that you refer to that are frankly downsizing or making some changes within their own team. So talking to your colleagues about the idea that you're adding to your team, they oftentimes have things to say. What about your reps? Right? You have reps who are coming in and out of the practice all the time. Guess what? They're going to other practices all the time. They have their ear to the ground. They are privy to a lot of the scuttlebutt that's taking place. So even if you use that person for reference, right? Hey, we're looking at Sally from Dr. Smith's office, and they say, oh, she's jumped around a lot. She's really given them some trouble. We're not talking about gossip. We don't want to get into opinions here. But the more important part of this is that sometimes, let's say that you're adding to the PR and marketing portion of your practice. If it's a new position for you, you don't always know what you're looking for. You don't always know who you're going to be hiring. And some of these reps are doing this work themselves. They're going to other practices themselves. They're networking and marketing for a business themselves. And they know just who would be perfect and who's making a change and who's leaving an office and which office is looking to help somebody get a good reference, things like that. So I think it's important to think about your reps, your affiliates, even sometimes your IT company that you work with has crossover in the industry and they're working with people. So it's important to think about, again, we're always widening the scope, making it bigger, taking a bigger bite. So if you do have, like we said, 5 or 10 different ways of your go-to places, then you have that as a hot list in every single practice, every location that you have, and suddenly you know what to do when you're in this situation. So again, let's just talk about the time that's required for hiring and how an HR manager or an office manager can make that time happen. Schedule it. Let's schedule it. Let's give you time every week. If you are not in an active hiring pattern, you should set aside time and put on your schedule every month development for your hiring practices, which means that this is where you're making these network connections. This is where you're preparing your hiring materials. This is where you're creating a body of ads that you want to have on file for when you need to post one. This is where you're getting all the most recent contact information for all of your networking venues. This is where you're going on Indeed and Glassdoor and Craigslist and you're doing an audit of what some of the other practices in the area are doing and what they're offering. So at a minimum, you should have on your management schedule every month to devote time to research and development having to do with this area. If you are in a desperate hiring situation, it is important for you to work with your doctor, perhaps your department heads, others in your practice, and really schedule when you are going to step away from your normal activities, not be available to the turning wheels of the machinery of your practice ongoings, and set aside the time for you to have a moment to look at the actions that you need to take. This gives you an opportunity to screen your applicants, to send your emails, to make your phone calls, to schedule your interviews, to have your interviews, to set up your interviews in an intelligent way so that when you do that, you can have the doctor step in for a moment or two and at least get an initial impression from the person so that if you want to have a working interview or a second interview, at least some contact has been made. In doing that, you're widening the depth and making it a more robust relationship that you're having with the candidate that you're talking to, right? So if I'm very quick on the phone with you and I say, hey, I got your application and I want to schedule you for an interview, okay, that's one way to do it. But we offer a lot of assistance in how to handle the phone work when you're screening applicants. There are some questions that you can ask. And there are some ways that you can talk about yourself in your practice and then kind of read between the lines and see the indicators of what this person is responding to, what they're not responding to. You can save yourself an awful lot of time by just taking a few more minutes in the phone calling and emailing process to additionally screen your applicants with some really genuine communication, right? And then you avoid having that interview that you found out is absolutely a wrong fit, or when you're in the interview, you just neglect to have the doctor come in. That's not an important thing to do. It's not really coming off. But I think that a lot of that comes down to you devoting the time in the first place and not doing it in between patients. Oh my goodness, I have 5 minutes. I think I'll go rush and do one thing because I can get it done right now. Get some presence and some composure and some time and some forethought woven into what it is that you're doing when you're doing this. So again, let's take a look at, can you get any referrals from your existing staff or patients? Do you have other fields that you can look at? Are there other areas of networking that you can get involved with that will be of help to you? This is a way for you to take a bigger bite of hiring, a bigger look at it, and some more time that's dedicated to it. I think it's also important to mention at this point, if you're an HR manager or an office manager, it's a good idea for you to grab your doctor and just have a conversation. There's nothing wrong with naming what you want before you go hunting for it, right? And if you just have a informing conversation with the doctor about, okay, I'm looking for someone, I'm thinking it's going to be this, and it needs to be this way, and ooh, you know what we could do? Just aligning with your doctor, your manager, your HR manager, and getting some agreement that we're going to seek and quickly find a great person, somebody that we can absorb into the team. The staff is aware of it, kind of put the word out. I think it helps us to adopt a little bit of a different posture towards the activity, and it does get results. There's quite a big difference between that and running around with your hair on fire, exasperated, huffing, and I've got to find this person. And I understand we all get into that mode and that tone, and it's better than nothing. So for sure, do it if you gotta. But if you don't have to, one of the things that really does make a difference is just changing the outlook. Cooperating with some of your teammates, getting a little bit more alignment and participation from others. It really can ease the burden quite a bit and make the approach and the work that you do quite different. So that's something to consider. I think those are the basics. You know, again, if I had to say anything, it really does have to do with taking an organized, comprehensive approach to the whole subject, trying not to just do it when you're drinking from a fire hose and it's a crazy activity that's mixed in with so many other things. Really understanding that the amount of outreach is directly proportionate with the amount of influx that you're going to get. So sometimes you have to send dozens of emails and make dozens of phone calls and have dozens of points of contact for you to get the right candidate. If you're looking for a one-to-one ratio, I made one phone call, I got one interview, it was the perfect person, I hired that person, I'm like, thank goodness that happened. That's not how this works. This is a numbers game. And you actually diminish your results when you try and play the game that way. I know that it sounds super efficient and wonderful, but sometimes you're eliminating your own possibilities when you take that approach. And it's a little desperate, if you know what I mean. So with that in mind, I think that covers most of the important points. Wanted to take an opportunity to see if there are any specific questions about either the timing that's involved or some of the specific problems that you run into in screening and hiring or looking for candidates, getting enough flow of candidates in the first place. In general, ePractice Manager is prepared to help you with things like your ads, placing your ads, rewriting them, making sure that they're widespread in terms of out to enough different potential applicants, screening your applicants both over the phone, through email, reading their resumes, things like that, but also your interview process. And then carrying that all the way forward into how do you onboard and train your staff, and what is the documentation procedure that you need to have, even for candidates that you don't hire, by the way. So any questions or successes that practices have had that they want to chime in about at this point, and kind of for the benefit of everybody in attendance, let us know about? Hello, anyone? Questions? All right, well then at a minimum, let's put this on the list of things that we continue to talk about in your coaching and consulting arrangement. It's important that we keep this alive as a subject, whether you are desperately hiring right in this moment or not. Some of these things are general information, and you can take a little emotional boost from a training session on this, or you can take a particular tip or trick away, but let's dial it in and get specific with those of you who need this type of assistance, and we're available to do that for you and with you. So thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are watching this as a recording later, feel free to email or contact me directly with questions that you have. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. All right. Bye.